Thank you for coming to our 2024 Farmland Preservation Appraisal Conference. We appreciate you being here. So something really big happened here at the SADC in the last week or so. Susan Payne retired. That is a big deal. She left a huge legacy, and she was an unbelievable director. Now let's talk about our first speaker, who's the Deputy Executive Director, Chuck Rohr.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. For those many of you who are actually doing appraisals for us, I want to say we particularly appreciate that. So thanks, Rich, for the introduction. My name is Chuck Rohr, and I'm the Deputy Director. So for today's Appraiser Conference, there's two topics that I'm going to touch on. One, I talked to you in depth about last year, and so there's only 2 slides for it. But there's been a little bit of updates. So it's a big topic for us. So I just wanted to let you know where we stand today. And that is soil protection standards. So starting in 2007, the SADC ended up in court with a landowner who took to work to bulldoze about 20 acres of his farm to make it pancake flat. And our office thought that was not appropriate. He thought, my deed of easement says I can build ag buildings and I need a flat surface to build my ag buildings. Why not? Anyway, we spent about 15 years in court. We eventually ended up in the Supreme Court. And in the end, the Supreme Court said, SADC, you're right. That shouldn't have happened. But the farmers also have a good point that the terms of your deed of easement, if you take a couple of there's some conflicting terms, if you stretch either one to its furthest extent. So as a result, we're going to give you this one as a win, but we're directing you that you need to prepare some regulations that set the goalposts. How are farmers in the future going to know when they're approaching that magic line of, I'm allowed to build some ag buildings, but apparently 20 acres of ag buildings is too much. Well, what is the number where that's okay? So we spent the next couple of years developing various forms of a regulation, and multiple times the ag community said, nope, that's not going to work for us. Start over. So that's what's taken so long. Anyway, last year we thought we were like in field goal range with this being complete. And the magic number last year that everybody settled on was 12%. There's a lot minor details. It's basically a 100-page rule. But the gist of it is 12% was the magic number that you could disturb on your farm, whether it be buildings, driveways, parking lots, you name it. We didn't care. Disturb 12%. And the rest had to be kept as good farmland. So we thought we were
12% of the east area or 12% of the entire site?
12% of the easement area. So if you have a 100-acre farm and then you had, say, a 5-acre exception, 5-acre exception is not part of this calculation. We don't put our easement on it, so we felt we didn't have any authority to tell you what you could do with it. So on a 100-acre easement, that would have been 12 acres. So we thought we were almost there with that, and then we got a little hitch at the very end. And so today, the rule is it is the 12%, but for all farms that are preserved before October of this year, they get the 12% plus whatever existing disturbance they have. Now, on most farms, existing disturbance is less than 2%. So on 95% of farms, it's really 12 plus maybe or 2. Some farms have 0%, so they're just going to be the 12. But there are a handful of farms. They're very built out farms, whether they be very large. It could be, most of them are greenhouse or nursery operations, but they could be from significant livestock operations with very large infrastructure. Some of them have a lot. There's a couple of farms that have over 12% already. So they're going to get what they have today. They're 12 plus another 12. It's just how the math worked out. And it was the compromise that we needed to do to get this back in field goal range. So if you are preserved before October of this year, you're going to get 12% plus whatever you have on site today, or 4 acres, whichever is more. So for farms that were less than 30, roughly 35 acres, that's where the 12% we thought those small farms, as you get really small, 12% of say 10 acres really isn't a whole lot to work with. So some of those smaller farms, 35 acres and under, we felt they needed a base amount of acreage to work with. Everybody needs a house, a barn, a driveway. So trying to facilitate something there. So if you're reserved before October 1st, you get whatever you have on the farm today plus 12%. After October 1st of this year, it's going to be that straight 12% or 4 acres if you're one of those smaller farms. So this has been proposed. The change of adding the additional disturbance that you have already today, that was considered a substantial change for the New Jersey Register. So we had to republish just those substantial changes to take comments on those. That's going to go in the Register this month. We're going to have a 30 or 60-day comment period. We're going to answer any questions on just that little bit about adding the current disturbance. And then we get to publish the entire as amended in a Register probably this fall. And we anticipate that the full published rule will come into effect likely around December, January 2025, so this winter. So this slide I presented to you guys last year, and all these dots, all these were next steps, but the checks are what's been done since I spoke to you guys last time. So like I was saying, published in the Register, got 30-day comment period. We have the change that's going to go back in. The committee approved this change at their April meeting. So it's going back in for comments only, just like I said. And then the time frame that I just explained about addressing the comments, publishing the full rule, and having it out on the streets as an adopted. We anticipate, like I said, roughly the very, very beginning of 2025. So that's soil protection. Those are the slides I had on that. Are there any questions on that? Yes, sir.
You have records.
Yes, I have one.
You have records of all the existing preserve farms and how their coverage ratios.
We do. So the way that we're doing that is that was, I mentioned there were many minor changes. So one of the other minor changes was the last available mapping data that the state had was a 2020 flyover that DEP had done. That was the best available. That's what the state had. That's what we're forced to use. We used a 2020 aerial to give people a copy of their farm, map of their farm in 2023. Some farmers said, well, it could be wrong. Maybe I built a new barn since then. We said, that's fine. We'll update it. But then other folks said, well, what if farmer gets their map and doesn't realize you made an error? So anyway, to resolve that, we have paid for a private company called NearMap. So NearMap does flyovers kind of as requested. They're giving us their most recent flyover, not giving us, but we're paying for their most recent flyover, which is 2023. So we're going to have, it is at this point 1 year old, but we're going to have 2023 data, which should be as up to date as we can get. And every farmer who's got a preserve farm is going to get their own custom map that shows what we're considering disturbance. Somebody online, I think. Joe, is there a question online?
You can unmute.
Yes, I have
question.
a question. Yeah. When you're talking about driveways and that kind of thing, where my farm, I'm on we have a nursery. So we have a lot of lanes going in because you have to get the equipment, tree spaders, trucks, everything in and out. So it's not like a big corn farm field. So do you count the lanes? Like if you have lanes with pervious surface, like crushed bluestone, for access, is that counted in your 12%?
So lanes, dirt lanes, unsurfaced dirt lanes do not count. Surfaced lanes, regardless of what they're surfaced with, would count.
Even in the Highlands, where Highlands takes the position that a gravel driveway is impervious.
For us, yes, any surfacing.
See, now, that doesn't make sense, because if you're going to be getting equipment in there and stuck in the mud, it's raining, you know, or you're doing irrigation with nursery stock. I think there has to be some sort of additional consideration given here. Um, where would we go to question this now?
So there's going to be, talking to the speaker, there's going to be 2 public comment periods. So one for the changes that were just made, which one is for the changes that were just made, which is the 12%, which is that your comment about the driveways wouldn't be then. After that public comment period, the entire rule is going to go into the register, and then you can comments would be for anything. So I would say it goes in June, July, August. So probably you're going to be looking for like a September, October timeframe to make those comments. I mean, that's the official formal comment period. You could always send your comments directly to the SEDC, and you know we'll certainly take them. But the formal comment period in the register requires us to take your comment and then answer it, and that answer gets published in the register as well. So either way, we would take it into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's another question. Do hoop houses contribute to disturbance?
Hoop houses, it depends on if you've had to excavate the ground to put the hoop house up. So we think of high tunnels, which is sort of a hoop house, an unheated hoop house. So if you're just building your hoop house or your high tunnel on existing grade, it does not count. But if you have to excavate the soil to construct the building, which is what happened with the fellow who went to court with, then it would definitely count. Anybody else in-house? All right, move to more meatier topic, which is the new state formula valuation law. So this is a law that was passed in earlier this year, January of 2008. It allows or actually requires the SADC to develop a formula valuation system for essentially coming up with appraisal numbers for farms that want to enter the program. So a little history of where we started and where we're at. You can see the map in 99. All the dark dots are preserved land. You can see what's happened over a 20-year time period. So you see a lot more dark dots on there. That means everybody's been working. A lot of you have been helping us out at that time with appraisals to get these farms preserved. So team effort. We had our 40-year anniversary last year, 40-year anniversary of farmland preservation. Also preserved our 250,000 acre last year. So we're actually above that number now. About 34% of the farmland in New Jersey is preserved. And our goal is roughly another 250,000 acres. So what's happened is it took us 40 years to get the first 250,000 acres. And if the goal is 500,000, I think everybody realizes we don't have another 40 years to do that. So the legislature has realized that we need to turbo boost the program. And so their thought is a formula system might help with that. And the law was passed in January. So I don't have to tell anybody here our appraisal process. So you've got the before value, full fair market value, the after value, what it's worth as a farm. The difference in those two is the easement. But what we're seeing happening is some cases before values are stagnant or going down. And in a lot of cases, after values are coming up. So anytime the before value comes down or the after value goes up, you're squeezing that easement number. And what's happening is people are looking at our program and going, you're only paying me the easement and it's not meeting my expectation because other offers seem a lot more generous. So what's wrong with you guys? So well, what's happening is these trends. We are obviously hearing landowners complain to us that for some reason they think our values are not representative of what they could get in the open market. We are seeing increased rate of rejections. We did a partner survey, so all the folks that we work with, the other organizations, counties, nonprofits, municipalities that work with us, we did a survey 2022 and asked, one of the questions was why, what do you think is the reason for the decrease in applications? And the big one was values are not meeting landowners' expectations. So then one of the more complicated things we did is Rich and Jolynn were able to compile 20 years of appraisal data, and we gave that to Rutgers. Slide I put in there, it's slightly out of place. I should have put this after, but hold on to that thought. We gave that appraisal data to Rutgers, but we also been working with Rowan. So Rowan's been doing a lot of GIS mapping for us. And one of the things that came out of that project is they found that over the last 2015 to 2020, roughly almost 19,000 acres of land have been converted to an urban use. And agriculture and forest land represents about 18,250 of those almost 19,000 acres. So you can see what's happening is we're losing the forest and we're losing the farmland to be converted to non-forest, non-farm uses, residential. And then the other thing is in 2015 to 2024, unregulated lands being lands that is either, it's not built on, it's not under easement, it's not a park, anything could happen to it, have decreased by about 200,000 acres in that less than 10-year time frame. So point being, the land is converting and at a pretty quick pace, which is why everybody knows we don't have another 40 years to get this next 250,000 acres. So thus the reason to try to jumpstart the program. All right, so back to Rutgers. Rich and Jolynn compiled 20 years of appraisal data, sent it over to Rutgers. I thought this would be a pretty simple task, but as it turns out, the Office of Research Analytics. So think of the most complicated math you can come up with and then triple it. And that's what statisticians do. I was shocked. These guys gave us an hour-long presentation. And after the first 2 minutes, it was way beyond any math that I'd ever seen before. But the bottom line conclusion was that what they figured out in that 20-year time frame is that the value of our easement as a percent of the fee value has been decreasing at about 1% a year over 20 years. So a 20% decrease in the time that this study was done. So 2000, the farmland preservation easement represented just a little bit more than 70% of the fee value. And now 20 years later, it represents just a little bit more than 50% value. So again, folks are saying the deal is not as good as it used to be. And turns out mathematically, they're right. We have had the anecdotal comment from some farmers that checked it out, and they're absolutely right that the offer that they were made, or that the offer that their parents were made for their farm 20 years ago is the same offer they got from us last year. And they are going, what the heck? All around us, we're seeing development and pretty handsome offers. How is the farmland preservation offer not keeping up with that? So turns out mathematically they're correct. So another bar chart to represent. So you've got your fee simple offer, and then you've got your after value, and you can see what's happening. 2000, 2022, the four values are trending down. The after value is staying relatively flat, and it's squeezing that easement value. So another representation of same. So we get to the formula value. So the formula value requires us to do several things and then allows us to do some other things. What it requires us to do is it modifies the GSPT Act, which is what allowed us to create the formula that we have in the Pinelands. So the Pinelands has had a formula for a little more than 20 years, and that's worked out good. But the Pinelands formula doesn't have an inflation adjuster in it. So, pardon me, my grandparents lived in the Pinelands, have a farm in the Pinelands. And years ago, when they were trying to get a whole block of folks in the area to preserve their farms, the local group that was pushing that came over, they met with my grandparents, and they said, the formula will give you $3,200 an acre. And they said, thanks, no thanks. My uncle lives in the Farmland still, and they went to him a year or so ago, and his offer was $3,600. So the inflation adjuster didn't really keep up. So the new law allows us to fix that. So that'll be great in the finance. It also amends the Preserve New Jersey Act, which is how we get our current funding through corporate business tax. So that's big. And it allows us, obviously, that is our main source of funding today by far. And so it amends that act to allow this formula to apply to that. And then it directs us to create this formula. Any entity that uses state funds, this formula is going to be applicable, that they're going to have to apply it. And that is for easements and fee simple. Easements, everybody knows about. We do some fees, probably represents less than 5% of our total acquisitions, but we do them. A few counties do them. So they happen. But the good news is the formula is going to apply to everything across the board. So one of the things that the formula law requires us to do is a pretty significant appraisal analysis, both locally, countywide, regionally, and allows us to not only look at the towns that farms are in, but the surrounding town and even a contiguous county. So again, applying this to myself, I live on the very eastern edge of Burlington County, where Burlington, Ocean, and Monmouth all kind of come together. And if I were to step over the line into Ocean County, the numbers for farmland go up noticeably. If I take a step in the other direction and go to the Monmouth County, they go up exponentially. So it's an interesting dynamic, but the new law allows us to adjust for those regional differences. The importance of preserving ag lands in a municipality or county. Now, it says the importance. I don't know why it wouldn't be important across the board, but there are certainly some towns that have decided through zoning that they would prefer the rateable, and that's okay. We're not looking to preserve every square foot of land, just those that want to get preserved. And if a town would rather see it converted, that's okay. We're just here to try to make an offer to those folks who are looking for something different. The status of natural resources. So that's new and it's big. There's a lot of things that farms provide that probably don't get valued when we do a traditional appraisal. You're going to see some of them later, but the natural resources of a farm staying a farm have a benefit to society that lots of folks say we would rather it stay a farm. It would help to mediate flooding and aquifer recharge and things like that. Nature, we're doing a project in Super North Jersey that is a trailway for endangered species. So lots of good natural resource aspects that, again, would be meaningless or maybe even a detriment to, say, Toll Brothers, but things that society says we like. So if we like them and we want to keep them, we should be able to pay the landowner for them. So this law allows us to take those things into consideration. So other factors would be, I mentioned rate of inflation adjuster for the pinelands, but we want the rule to be a living, the formula, I'm saying. We want the formula to be a living formula that we don't have to adjust every year. So we want to build some things into it that will make it so it can live on. One of them is the inflation adjuster. So we want that to be built in. Of course, we're always looking at the quality of the soils, size of the farm, and how likely is it to be converted to some other use. And then here's number 6, this list of things that we can add additional value. The things, like I was mentioning before, that traditionally didn't get assigned much, if any, value, we can now pump up the number to account for that. So things like proximity to other preserved farmland, recreational lands, aquifer recharge is specifically mentioned in the law. other lands with conservation easements. And then this last one, so lands where the conversion to a non-ag use would be a detriment. So there's a whole bunch of them, but the big one, again, I keep using myself as the example. I live right next to Joint Base McGuire. And so for years, the county has been trying to acquire parcels around the base because having farmland around the base is a lot better for the military than having houses or even industrial uses, because it's just safer. Those sites, there's a Lockheed Martin site out in Morristown, got state police barracks. There's other sites besides military bases, but you can see why having farmland or keeping it farmland is probably the best, well, probably the better choice for lots of different reasons. But again, we've never really been able to pay for them, and now we can. So here's the crux of it for the appraisal community. The formula is an option that we're able to offer, but it is not replacing the traditional appraisal process. Every landowner is required to get their standard 2 independent appraisals, and then we'll run the formula on top of it. And they get to take whatever is the better offer. In addition to that, there's also Pineland. So the Pinelands still going to have their formula and their PDC credits. Again, landowners get the better of whatever offer comes their way. Highlands dual appraisal. So right now, I think it's actually only till the end of June. Yeah. So since 2004, farms in the Highlands have been able to be appraised at their 2004 value. So before the Highlands law came into effect and put much more restrictive zoning up there, that law is set to expire at the end of this month. We anticipated, and we anticipate that the legislature will extend it. But and assuming they do, they will get the benefit of their appraisals, Highland style, and/or the formula, and take whatever's best. So again, the irregular appraisal process will continue as is. The formula is just going to be on top of it, and then the landowner gets to pick which value they would prefer. A landowner could decide to waive one or the other. So I'm not sure what the benefit would be to waiving my traditional appraisal unless I had to close because of an emergency. If I am, I don't know, maybe in a bankruptcy situation or have some extreme medical bill to pay, maybe I just say, hey, look, give me the formula at the kitchen table. I'll take the deal today. Let's get it done. I need money. But other than that, I don't know why anybody would wait to see what their traditional appraisals say, look at them both, and then take the better offer. Oh, so this is not unimportant, but we also do farms where we preserve with federal dollars through the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. Those used to be called Farm and Ranch Land Program. Now it's called ALE, but they offer federal dollars. It's a very similar easement to ours. And it helps in cases where, say, a township can't make their matching part of the grant. We can plug in federal dollars for that. We've used it a few other times, but we probably have maybe 200-ish easements that have federal money on them right now. Normally, the feds say you have to use our appraisal process. It's called
Yellow book.
Yellow Book. You have to use our appraisal process. That's it. No questions asked. What we found with this is they do have an alternate valuation method, but they have to approve it. And so what we were told was, as you guys are developing this formula, keep our realty specialist in the loop. And as long as that person is comfortable with how you develop the formula, once you get it ready next spring, we hope that they can just check the box and say, yes, it's good to go. But that remains to be seen. But in the worst case scenario, if the feds were not willing to accept our formula, like I said, we do a small amount of easements that way. So it it wouldn't be a major detriment to the program. The other benefit to this law, which is kind of unique, is I mentioned with the soil protection rule, the publishing in the register, the public comments, answer the comments, it comes back for a rewrite, and you have to put the rewrite back in the register. That process is going to, soil protection standards, going to take 6 to 9 months, just the commenting part of it, because of all the back and forth. So the way the legislature wrote this law is they said, upon your notice of filing, the formula becomes active and you can start using it. So we're still going to have to go through the public comment phases, but we don't have to wait to use it. The law becomes effective the date that we put it in the register. So, and it gives us 3 years to really work out the fine details that should take that line. Last slide. Oh, no, it's not the last slide. This is the last slide. So part of this process, we have hired Forward Planning. They're a real estate and planning group based in Philly with offices in New York and Pittsburgh. And they're helping us figure out this massive regional value trend. So assessing all appraisal data statewide. They're also, they have a Professor Tom Daniels, who's a Penn State professor who has spent his career doing farmland preservation and interesting methodologies to get lands preserved. He's on their team helping us to understand how do other states do this. We know that other states place value on some of those natural resource things. And they also have creative ways of preserving land that's a little different than how we currently do it in New Jersey. So he's doing kind of the nationwide search on that to figure out what will fit the New Jersey model. And then all these things that are natural resource based that we can now place value on, collectively calling it ecosystem services. So we know we can place value on them, but right now we have no idea what that value is. So aquifer recharge, everybody agrees that's a good thing. Flood mitigation, everybody agrees that's a good thing. But what is it worth? And what is it worth in different areas? So that is, to put it mildly, complicated. And Forward Planning is going to help us out with that. We've hired them. Todd Poole is their principal. And I don't know if Todd or Forward Planning is on the line right now. Okay, Todd's on. But they will likely be reaching out to you guys to get your professional opinions on real estate, the real estate market in your particular area. So you may hear from Forward Planning. And if you do, please try to help them out. You know what, did Todd just listening, or you want to try?
Yeah, I'm on, Chuck.
Hey, Todd, you have the floor if you'd like. I have the appraisers here and some online.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Just very quickly, as Chuck mentioned, we will be looking to reach out, certainly not to everyone, but to at least some of you folks who have pretty deep experience appraising farmland throughout the state. There will be certain areas of the state we want to focus in on, obviously those areas, central, south Jersey, where there's still a lot of farmland left to preserve. And our objective is probably to, identify your approach, over the last 10, 15 years, if it's changed at all, why, and the factors that have, influenced your valuation for appraisal purposes. We're thinking of doing a combination of one-on-one interviews, which would be, principally either by phone or using a virtual method, as well as doing maybe a few different focus groups as well. We find that doing combination of interviews and focus groups gives us a richer input than just doing one or the other. So I would say stay tuned, and we look forward to speaking to some of you. Thank you.
So that is the last slide. Does anybody have any questions on the formula value process or questions at all for either me or Mr. Poole?
Online.
Well, we have one right here in person.
Okay. The formula value, we as appraisers don't have to worry about that at all, right? So do we have to mention it in our report that they have an option or do anything? Okay,
No,
No, there's no
No.
need to do that.
I'm gonna talk a little more about this. For now, I think you're just doing the appraisals the way you're doing them, and that's independent from your valuation, much like if you've worked in the pine lands. You might not even know there was a formula that they're comparing to the appraised amount. So the answer to that I think is no for now.
You said it was.
There is not.
Well, so I'll end with the formula value process is evolving. We've just started it. We are currently in the process of forward planning, doing the research end of it. SADC is doing stakeholder outreach. So to the counties that we work with, nonprofits, the ag community in general. Our time frame is to have that wrapped up this summer. We'd like to have draft report on what findings are September, October. And hopefully we have a beta version of the formula that we can test out in the fall. And our goal is to have the formula ready to go, usable for the early spring of 2025. So we will keep you guys updated as we're developing it, but it's just the beginning phases right now. And like Mr. Poole said, if we are definitely interested in your feedback on any of the trends or any things that you're noticing locally. So if he reaches out to you, anything that you're able to provide him, if we can work it into the formula, certainly will. Sir.
Don't have an actual formula right now.
Oh, no, there's no formula right now.
Is there a concern that the formula might set the value?
Might set the value.
Yeah, it could set the value of market value of products. I mean, it's not what you said, it's not market value. There's other things involved there that it's market value to, I guess, the state for their purpose, but that's not market value. So knowing that, like, the farmer who's buying the land doesn't care that, oh, this is great for the Air Force Base. Doesn't matter to them. But it just might drive the values based on the form that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So in the ag community, formula value could increase cost of land.
Yeah.
And so a farmer wanting to buy land is not placing value on proximity to a military base or aquifer recharge or things like that. Well, that's an interesting observation. I would say that I personally had not considered that. This is all new to me, and this whole appraisal process is not what I do. So that is a great observation. And
Well, it's gonna be hard. You have somebody who has, they get 4,000 an acre, and then their farm comes along and they get 35. They're like, well, wait a second. My neighbor got 4,000, but they have a better formula than I. They don't even know that. They just want the 4,000. I think that's what they're saying.
Right, because in the end, when that property sells, you're gonna potentially or possibly use that as a comp, right? And then going forward, that could drive the values. Because each farmer is gonna want that, oh, the neighbor got that 4,000, so we're gonna get 4,000. And then if the formula is similar, then it starts to kind of ratchet it up a bit.
I think we need to remember that all this remains to be seen.
Right.
But I think what we need to remember is that when you wouldn't be using the easement value as a comp when something is preserved, because that's just for the easement. So, when you're doing your comps, you want to be using actual sales to, an actual arm's length transaction. So, but these are all good questions. I think this is all, remains to be
I'm going to
seen.
be talking more about this a little on a slide later. Maybe it affects the before value.
That's what I mean.
If buyers, it starts to impact what they're paying for unrestricted land if they know they're going to get a bonus if they preserve it. But we're just going to have to, work through that, but I'll be talking more about this a little later. If you have any other questions, ask away.
Well, it's just, so I took this gentleman's question maybe a little different. I don't know if it's how you meant it, but when a farmer sees, well, my neighbor got 4,000 an acre, you're offering me 3,500, I want the 4,000. Why is it different? So in our first meeting with forward planning, we were discussing, the ag community and how it's a different community than, developers and et cetera. And one of the things that Mr. Poole pointed out was formula needs to be understandable by the landowner. It can't be this giant calculus equation. And so and his point being, landowners need to understand how we gave them that valuation, and whether they like the value or not, they need to be comfortable that they got the fairest offer that we could make them. And so part of this process is going to be educating landowners, creating a formula that everybody can understand. And we offered your neighbor 4,000, we offered you 3,500. We can run the formula on both of them and you can see how we did the math. And you may not like the 3,500, but at least you're comfortable that we gave you the fairest offer. So that'll definitely be part of it. Anybody else?
Hey, guys. So, Chuck, there was one more. I think you covered this. This is all the timing. I think you covered this. Do you want to?
So the timing of when the formula is going to come out?
Yeah, it's just one more slide.
So, yeah, so we're working on the stakeholder engagement right now. Forward planning is doing the research for us right now. We hope to have a report done early fall, September, October, and a draft formula in the later fall, and then a formula that we can actually put in the register and then make usable to the public in the very early winter, spring of 2025. So the goal is formula to be out and usable by, let's just say, March 2025.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a guest speaker today. His name is Peter Cocoziello. He is a councilman as well as a planning board member in Far Hills. He is also principal of Advanced Realty, and we welcome him to come speak to us about development trends and the like. So welcome, Peter.
Thanks so much. It's very funny when you look at values of property, because everybody always tells me that best appraisal has a check attached. And whenever you speak with individual property owners, everybody always has this sense that their property is worth an exorbitant amount of money. And they don't really understand where things are in the cycle of the municipality in terms of how they look at zoning, and also with state, how they look at regulatory activities with NJDP or a lot of other actions like that that have adverse impacts on people's land values. So when you look at pieces of property, it becomes very critical to constantly engage in, if you're a property owner, be engaging with your municipality, try and fully understand what everyone's goals and objectives are. And I continually, and even when I heard your presentation, sometimes I feel there's a strong disconnect between what the individual property owners' goals and objectives are and what state's goals and objectives are and what the municipality's goals and objectives are. You wind up putting yourself in a situation where everybody seems to be kind of fighting or rushing to try and get something done without adequate interaction with how all these different components affect the ultimate value. So today I'm looking to really have a discussion about how we really dive into the world of land values, how from my perspective as a real estate developer, we look at various different pieces of property and how our engagement process is with various different groups, whether it's the landowner, municipality, or the state, or even the stakeholders in every community in terms of trying to achieve what, win-win situation would look like. So I think when you look at the state of New Jersey on a whole, you have to really focus on some of the trendy trends in real estate. When you look at the trendy trends, everybody for the last couple of years have been predominantly talking about what industrial development and the impact of industrial development is on land values. And those numbers have been staggering. And everybody will pull a comp from, the Newark airport area and be down in South Jersey and say, well, if they paid $200 per developable foot there, my property's got to be worth 180. But there's so many other factors that kind of come into play, all of this stuff. So New Jersey continues to be the largest and most in-demand industrial market in the United States. There's 640 million square feet of industrial kind of class A, B assets in the state. Interestingly, in the last year, we delivered 27 million square feet of class A industrial space. So that's a pretty significant number. And a lot of that space, if you look at vacancy rate in some of these communities, a lot of that's a result of speculative development. A lot of developers have been buying up land all over the state. And this really has a direct impact on farmland, because especially in South Jersey, people have been paying exorbitant amount of money to convert some of these farms into active development sites. And that market, I think, is cooling off just a little bit as time moves on. But the fact that our port remains the #1 port in the United States, I think that the e-commerce activity we'll continue to see is going to be extremely strong. The other concept that's very interesting is people are looking at office conversion projects. The office building market continues to be extremely weak throughout the state of New Jersey. We're probably the worst in the tri-state area. And you can credit a lot of that to the fact that New York City has continued to be a very strong economic and social hub that we've always been kind of the stepchild to. As people look at working from home and some of these other activities, it really has a negative impact on your traditional or antiquated office space throughout the state. The third concept that I think is going to have huge impacts throughout the state is when you look at the affordable housing requirements, a lot of these municipalities, the numbers that are coming out are pretty staggering and will, on certain, for whatever reason, are going to push substantial amount of development, whether it's market rate or affordable housing development in some of these communities. So many towns are looking at how to take property that's even in 20-acre zoned areas, put in a source service area, put in a package treatment plant, and all of a sudden approve it for hundreds of townhomes or multifamily development. So if you own a farm in a town like that, all of a sudden you start seeing that kind of transformation occurring in your mind. You're saying, well, if they got that for their property, they went through this process, I could do the same thing and my value should be that. The numbers on some of those acquisitions are pretty substantial. And, some of the big developers are paying upwards of $200,000 to $250,000 per unit for market rate townhome land. So if you own 40 acres, you feel, at 20 units an acre, somebody buys a piece of property for $1.5 million, all of a sudden, Toll Brothers thinks it's worth $35 million. That's a pretty attractive market rate kind of transaction to move forward with. So I think as time goes on with the COA regulation, it's not really COA anymore, but the affordable housing requirements placed on some of these communities, starting in 2025, over the next 10-year increment, you're going to see a huge influx of developers trying to acquire land in a lot of these communities that typically have been very anti-development. It's going to put further pressure on the preservation activity that really needs to occur in order to make sure that the ecosystem in the state is, in a strong and healthy position. The next topic that I think is somewhat interesting is this ongoing conversation about residential versus commercial type of development. There's various different impacts that those uses bring on a community. Residential, the conversation's always geared towards school children. The cost of educating school children in the state of New Jersey is extremely high. Our Somerset County town's about $28,000 per pupil. I think that's kind of across the board. So people will look at a development coming in, and if a development brings in 100 school children, all of a sudden you're looking at increasing the costs by billions of dollars for the overall taxpayer. A lot of people are starting to say, we want more mixed use development, more commercial development, and where really is the boundary defined in our community? So the boundaries have been being pushed out substantially in a lot of these towns, and that's taking land that's owned by individuals that could typically be in a 20 or 30 acre zoned area. And people are all of a sudden thinking that their property is worth exponentially more than what the market might even wind up paying for it. But it's really putting downward pressure on any sort of preservation type of activity. So I think it's critically important that the municipalities start discussing the significance of preservation and how to do cluster zoning, or typically there was easement, restriction areas or areas that weren't restricted. So if you had 100 acres, you don't have to preserve all 100 acres, but you can preserve 80 acres, leave 20 acres for development, and the net benefit could actually increase the value of properties surrounding it and inside a community. Those conversations, I think, are going to start happening a lot faster. But in the interim, the challenge is land is something that's going to be worth a lot of money, is worth a lot of money, will continue to be worth more when communities are finding out they have to build 2,000 market rate homes. This is throughout the entire state. Every community is going to go through this. We've seen it for the last 10 years. So when that happens, and you have companies like Toll Brothers and Pulte and Lennar coming in and paying these large sums of money for approved sites, you're going to see a lot less preservation activity throughout the state of New Jersey, in my opinion. So people care. Your question, we can have it.
Well, I'm thinking of your example. You've got 50 acres and you've got a density of maybe 100 units.
Right.
I think you're compelled to try to cluster that development so you can have some open space, whether it's farmland or just open area. We don't want the sprawl we got in the 80s. That's what I'm trying to get at.
That's the problem that a lot of these communities are facing and trying to stop. And one of the topics that I wanted to cover is how values are instantly affected by regulatory shifts or changes to the positive or to the detriment. So one of the questions everybody always asks is approved or not approved? What does that really mean? Because if a piece of property is zoned, as a lot of people understand, just because something is zoned doesn't mean somebody can go and pull a building permit tomorrow and start building. The approval process in New Jersey is very similar to a giant maze. You can get lost, you have no idea where you're going, and knowing the rules and knowing how different communities are structured, whether it's borough, form of government, or whatever it is, it has drastic impacts. So the value on a piece of property is ultimately created the moment the developer receives unappealable site plan approval. And that means they've gone through the entire planning board process, they've properly noticed, and that process costs, in some cases, $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million. can take anywhere from 8 months to 8 years. And it's something that a lot of people struggle to understand because they'll say, well, my property's next to that. We have the same zoning. You can do the same thing. Like, no, you can't. The governing body and the planning board in a lot of these communities still holds the keys to what any landowner can do on their property. So when you look at the various different valuation approaches, it becomes critical to understand where that property sits in that metric. So I always say green is the new gold. And farmland preservation has substantial value that can be derived from clustering as well as park growth and producing.
Peter, while you're doing that, would it make any sense with the office market, which is kind of long overdue, becoming just functionally obsolete because we don't need the office space? Would it make sense to incentivize redevelopment of that into housing to preserve our? If you do that, you get the win-win of not developing that open land and repurposing a building, because that can be a incredibly costly.
You have to look at the infrastructure that exists. And when you look at some of these office complexes, they spend a ton of money on sewer, water, and ultimately, if you can't utilize that infrastructure, you really have no value to it. So then you're looking at an entire demo situation. And the governing body, when that happens, they sit there and say, I just lost a $20 million rate.
But it's vacant. It's not going to be working on.
They're still getting the tax. So I think that redevelopment is definitely going to be an ongoing trend.
I'm just wondering if it makes sense to incentivize it.
Yeah. A lot of office buildings can be easily converted to residential based on the size. Some absolutely not. So one of the examples I like to constantly think about how values change rapidly is cap rate is really the function of the cost of debt and the cost of equity. So when you're in a situation where interest rates are going up and investors are seeking a higher return, values start dropping at a massive rate. And that's sort of where we're at today. So a piece of property with net operating income of $1 million, if the cap rate's 5, it's a 20 multiple. So if the cap rate goes to 10, basically just lost $10 million value on an asset. So that can happen extremely fast, as we've seen this rise in interest rates. And also, you're in a situation where the investment prospect for New Jersey is somewhat challenging right now. So the economic environment is not very strong. And you're putting yourself in a situation where how durable is that cash flow? And when you look at the value of an existing asset, that $2 million, $1 billion NOI quickly go to $500,000 heading bankrupt. And that becomes a challenge. The other major issue that continues to happen is the regulatory environment, DEP, as well as local governments and various different organizations pushing anti-warehousing bills and restrictions on stormwater management. These things render a substantial amount of property undeveloped. When that happens, there could be an interesting conversation about how to somehow derive value, creating more stormwater infrastructure and encourage people to put some of this property into preservation prior to going forward with any sort of development plan, because the development plan could ultimately have a negative impact on the overall community if it doesn't meet the objectives of the state with water quality and runoff and stormwater management. So people have to be very careful because a piece of property that you could one day build 400 townhomes on could instantly change to a site that you could only build 80. And in that case, the value you get from preserving that property or selling development rights could be substantially higher prior to an economic change like that.
Peter, question. Single family development opposed to multifamily. Multifamily has outpaced single family everywhere I see it, right?
So if you look at the cost of site work on single family home tract type development and what towns are requiring for minimum lot sizes, setbacks, and buffers, there's no way you can get to the same value as you would get to if you were selling a townhome project to one of the big developers. So single family in New Jersey is pretty interesting because the housing stock in New Jersey, all of the housing starts happened probably 40 years ago at this time. We've been trending down over the last 40 years. The age of that product is so old. The amount of money that anybody would have to pour into bringing a lot of that product up to the standards you would expect today is almost cost prohibitive, especially when you're in an environment where rates are so high. So when you look at the comparison game with various different pieces of property, this is the most difficult because I always say it's like you have apples and oranges, but every single time you do it, you wind up with a banana because you're in a place where no two properties are the same. No two owners' expectations are the same. And how do you kind of get to a situation where you can have uniformity in thought process and really transparency, for your example, with the landowner? And it's going to continue to become very challenging. And I know the state's probably trying to figure out some formula or whatever it is to kind of make things seem more even. But unless we can get to a position where either the tax benefits or the financial payment to the landowner is elevated or in line with what the market pay, the market's always going to win in terms of dictating future on people's decision-making process. So it is somewhat challenging and difficult to look at. One of the things that I had talked about in the community that I work in, we're trying to figure out how to encourage these large lot owners to put their property into preservation. And we face various different comments, questions from them. And one of them is, well, I don't want to give my property to some organization like Green Acres or Open Space because I don't know what they're going to do with it. Because a lot of these people, they've owned this property for 50, 60, 100 years, and they don't necessarily understand. You show up with an easement document like this, they have no idea what they're looking at. But I think it's really about just managing the expectations. The challenge that we always have is when a developer comes along and tells them, oh, I'm going to pay you $35 million for your property. That's a subject to approvals value. So somebody's going out and saying, oh, I sold my property for $35 million. Well, you could be 8 years away from that. You got to carry it. You got to potentially do some site work. There's a whole bunch of environmental issues with remediation and demolition and things like that that need to be considered. And a lot of that's very challenging to truly understand in terms of how that deal was structured. Because when you look at a land sale comp, none of that information is available. That would all be in the purchase and sale agreement. So when you're talking to somebody who are preserving their property, it's very challenging to kind of understand what happened on 3 other pieces of property inside your municipality or maybe the town next door, all they see is a number. And they just keep trying to drive to the number. Sometimes they don't understand the process. So zoning is obviously something that controls the value of the property to the greatest extent. So a lot of communities feel very strongly that creating 40 or 50 acre lots is something that encourages land preservation and helps the overall community. My perspective, some of the things that we've seen is people at that point are rushing to try and submit site plan approval for subdivisions, multifamily developments, all this other kind of stuff. It kind of backfires on you eventually. And I think it becomes critically important to constantly have that type of engagement with the landowner to make sure that everyone's goals and objectives are aligned. And I've even called people, what's your long-term plan with your property? And they think, no one's ever asked me that. I sit there, I said, here we are going through master plans, zoning, and all this kind of stuff that directly affect only 10 or 20 property owners inside the town. We should have a conversation with those people and really try and understand what they want to do and what they think their property's worth. And some people's ultimate goal is to preserve it. And how do we get that to happen sooner if that's their goal? Or if their ultimate goal is to sell it, develop it, everyone's entitled to do what they feel is in their best interest. But it's important to know that stuff kind of upfront. You don't want to be kind of surprised as you go through the process. So, any other questions?
It's not a question, but it's just an observation to bolster what you just said about the downzoning concept. So part of my presentation, for values going down, think how could that happen in a place like New Jersey? So there are some towns, there are some towns that when they saw building boom happening 20 years ago, they downsized and they went from 1 acre to 3 acre to 6 acre to 10 acre zoning is not entirely uncommon in Burlington County. And what happened is that's part of the reason that the before value in those towns has stagnated or even gotten lower, is because of a property that had 1 or 3 acre zoning when we started now has 10 acre zoning. And we had just 2 months ago, we had the example of a town that did that. And then Horton developers, D.R. Horton, came in with a builder's remedy. And in a town that had 10 acre zoning, they said on this 150 acre farm, we're going to put 1,000 units in a very rural, 10 acre zoned area. And it really blew the numbers out of the water. But farmland preservation couldn't account for that. And so we had to look at it as a 150 acre farm with 10 acre zoning. The valuation really meant nothing compared to what developer could offer through the builder's remedy. So the idea of the down zoning backfiring, we're seeing that start to happen now, either in we can't offer the preservation value that it used to be worth, or other entities are coming in with other uses that they can really the zoning doesn't matter as much to them because they've got other options. So just backing up the backfiring, we're seeing that in reality now.
The other part of that too is when you downzone, you change what the developer is going to build. And what we ended up with is far too much land for a 4 to 5 bedroom home, 2.5 baths, a 3-car garage. And that's all that was built in the mid 2000s. No one was building a 2,200 square foot home. They're all building these much bigger houses, McMansions. And so we end up with a bigger disparity on the affordable.
Right, and when the state does their mapping, come up with what the affordable numbers are for towns. If you have a house on 50 acres, somebody sits, they could build 10 more over there. And now you have a number, and the number just keeps going up. So
down zoning, I think primarily does wind up backfiring in a lot of time. And then you're in a situation where you're trying to operate a municipality, there's a budget. You know, the school board produces their budget, gives it to you, you pass that budget through to the taxpayers. At some point, there's a huge imbalance between what the expenses are in a community and what really the sources of revenue are. And there are communities where taxes, even on commercial assets, go up, you know, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year. And when that starts happening, you're in a situation, remember the cap rate methodology, the property taxes go up by $100,000, you just tank the value of that asset by $2 million. So you do that 10 times, you know, $20 million is gone. The loan comes due and it's worth $20 million less. So doing these sort of things, you know, to be anti-development, ultimately, you know, I don't see a clear path where it's a win-win for the taxpayer in the community, for the school board that needs to, you know, be funded in a healthy way, and for the residents' property values. Because, you know, you wind up just having very stagnant housing stock or commercial, you know, rateable base that kind of can't evolve out of it, grow beyond. So I think that, you know, preserving land is critically important in some of these communities, but I always tell people there's a balancing act. So if we're going to go preserve 250 acres of land that will never be added to our rateable base, gone, what are we doing to protect the existing taxpayers on a 10-year, 20-year outlook, that their taxes don't triple or quadruple in order to keep up with the expense load of some of the infrastructure that's, you know, antiquated and needs to be upgraded in some of these communities. And those kind of things have massive negative impacts on value. So some of the discussion that we constantly have is how do we think through, and one of the things that I think a lot of people in your guys' situation could do is come to some of these communities and, I don't know, hired as consultants, speak to them, explain to them how some of these decisions can have massive impacts on people's property values. And if they care very much about pushing preservation initiatives, well, maybe they should go and upzone some of these properties, give all the value, and then you come in and do an appraisal based on value. And it's kind of mutual trust and respect. If they never want to develop it, they have the value, they hold it for whatever it is, 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years with that right, with that value. And then they donate or sell pieces of it off. But over a 5 or 6 year period, the end result could potentially be far greater for everybody if you know, you have those types of discussions. But there's certainly a lack of good data. It was the first time I saw that easement value, you know, is a diminishing thing. And funny you said that, because I used to live in Tewksbury Township many years ago, and there was a bunch of pieces of property that people preserved. And there was one that was 140 acres, beautiful house, and the, you know, farmhouse in the exception area. Guy from New York comes out and wanted to do a vineyard for wine for himself. He was into soils and into all this stuff. The soil was perfect. The town went ballistic. They didn't want him to do anything. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, this guy comes, he spends all this money, bought a farmland preserved property to farm. He just wanted grapes instead of apple trees or whatever else. And the governing body created so many problems for this guy. He gave up on one aspect of it. I don't know, ultimately I didn't follow it. But those types of actions don't necessarily make a landowner feel happy about farming or preserving land. So I don't know what went wrong in that equation for somebody, but it's not that kind of guy moves away. And if it's not preserved, it winds up becoming 40 houses. And then what?
How can the town dictate what you're gonna grow?
I don't know.
Or was it, or did you want to do like an event center?
A bunch of outbuildings and it's fine. I don't know what happened. It was in the paper all over the place.
I think it's a lot of. Ultimately, the town probably couldn't have told him no. He probably could have sought right to farm protection. But town put up a lot of hurdles, to make it complicated or time consuming or expensive. And some towns like this fella had some resources, but you could imagine a tomato farmer. They're like, hey, you know what? I'll just sell it to brothers. It's easier than dealing with this nonsense. That happens. Part of the SADC's mission, not only preservation, but also trying to make farming a more sustainable business.
This vineyard was already preserved.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so it's already preserved. So how can the town say you can't grow corn? Or you have to grow corn, you can't grow grapes?
Well, I'm saying, they probably couldn't if it was taken to the nth degree, but the town always put up hurdles. And if this fell.
You still have to go through a planning, board, I think. I don't know how the red.
I mean, no one's ever come forward to a planning board and say, I want to plant alfalfa instead of corn this year.
It had to do with outbuilding, which is another thing. Certain agricultural uses require, like in this specific example, a lot more outbuildings. I mean, nothing was crazy, but very different than hay. If you need a controlled type of environment, you're running fermentation, you're dehumidifying, drying, and hanging. But there's a lot of lack of clarity that people have with what does all this really mean for the end user of the property. And I think it all dovetails back into what's the value of that, because I can assure you that property would be worth a lot more money without that easement. But when you have somebody who's really trying to do the right thing, it becomes critical that everybody kind of works together to see that vision get carried out. Somebody asked a question earlier that I thought was interesting. When you have, it's what is the benefit or the use to the owner or the buyer, and that benefit or use can change dramatically. But the goals and objectives need to be clear and aligned. In the sense that if I own a piece of property that I want a tomato farm, and somebody cares about its proximity to a military base or whether the groundwater recharge, which has no benefit to me, you don't want to price somebody out that has the right intent. So I think a lot of consideration needs to be taken into just what's the ultimate goal. If the goal is just to collect more land, serve more land, I think that's a great goal, and that could be the result of what's going to happen with that land. What's the best use for it, and how does all this positively impact the value of all the land around it? I think that's where the clarity is not so obvious for a lot of towns. Any other questions? Yes.
When you talked about long-term impact of taking a piece of property and preserving it, how it affects the rest of the community, how does this affect and how will it come to the town's affordable housing units?
In what regard?
They still have an obligation to have so many units, but you take 250 acres out of the equation to put it into preservation. How does that affect the total of their?
Technically, it should be out of the state's calculation if it's already in preservation. A lot of that data doesn't necessarily get caught up correctly in the system, because I know in our town, when we were looking at this stuff, there's certain pieces of property that have slopes like this that on a map, I guess they thought were flat. There was property that had conservation easements sprinkled throughout the entirety of the property, and somebody was just saying, oh, it's a 20-acre piece of property you could build 100 units on.
Are they, as land becomes reserved, does it affect the what number of affordable units the town has to provide?
It should, going forward. The question is, when did it get preserved and when was the calculation done? Because once you have to agree, everyone has to agree to the number, I think, at the end of January 2025. So somebody puts their property in preservation in October. I presume you're gonna have a bunch of people rushing to put it in preservation before October. That probably won't be in that number. So there's some towns, Bergen County, that have 1,000 affordable unit requirement. So if you have to build 1,000 affordable units,
It'll never happen.
at 20%, that means you have to build 5,000 total housing units. I don't know where the land is or the infrastructure to do some of that stuff.
Just build the fence.
Well, that's the concept you were talking about, repurposing. So some of the regional malls, you've seen Westfield Mall of Bergen Counties, at a proposal to build 2,000 units, create a more adaptive reuse, lifestyle kind of center. You're going to see a lot more of that happening over the next 10 years. So it's certainly going to be interesting to watch. But I think being more proactive is best. That's why I think the disconnect between what a lot of governing bodies and towns think the best zoning practices and the result they're seeking, which is less development activity, more preserved land, actually might have an adverse impact. So having the knowledge that some of you have coming into some of these communities and discussing the impacts on values, negative or positive, I think would be a very beneficial thing for some of these towns. And we hire planners, engineers, and everybody else. We don't understand a lot of times what the impact of these decisions mean. So, any other questions? Pretty much it.
That was awesome. It's great to hear from a developer's perspective. That was very, very helpful. Yeah, great speaker, Joe. Good work.
Anyone else?
I do not see any questions online. Anybody online who has any questions?
I'll tell you this, more preserved land would be more allergies.
Peter, thank you very
Peter,
much. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So welcome back. We are now going to talk about the deed of easement and the cost sharing grant agreement. And I just want to backtrack a second and say that what Rich said is true. He said that, you know, I'll leave this conference and I'll start making the conference for next year. That is true. It does take a lot of time to put the conference together. It can't be thrown together overnight. So one thing that I want to let you know is that the next topic I'm going to talk about is something that came from one of our appraisers. They called, they had a question. And I said, you know what, that is a really good question. And I'm sure other people would like to know about it. So I threw it into the conference. So I want to encourage you, if you guys have questions or issues, you know, feel free to call us. I mean, I think we're pretty responsive. And if it's something that we feel that the rest of the appraiser community should be aware of, then we'll talk about it. And you saw that with the webinar too. So this topic is deed of easement and the cost sharing grant agreement. And so we did talk about the deed of easement at the last conference. We're going to talk about something different with the deed of easement. And as you know, the deed of easement is kind of like the real important document once we preserve a farm. And so it can be difficult to read through. So I'm going to just talk about a little hack. So it's probably difficult for you to see this, but the point is I'm just showing an excerpt of the deed of easement. This is paragraph 23. And it's going to be, you know, pretty close to 23. In paragraph 23, there are some numbers. I should point my laser instead of that. For those of you who are online, there are some numbers here at the end, and it kind of looks like just some random numbers and, you know, oh, what could possibly have any relevance to me? But actually, these are values. And if you didn't know about it before, you might have overlooked this. But this can be a clue for you. So if you're looking at this, you'll see that that 4,300 number, and it doesn't have a dollar sign. It could, but in this case, it doesn't. It could easily be overlooked. The 4,300 is the easement value. That is the number that the committee certified. We pay $4,300 per acre on this farm. Then you'll see another number, 8,200. The 8,200 was the before value. That was the unrestricted value paid for this farm. Well, not paid, but you know what I mean. Since we are appraisers, we are great mathematicians, which means that we could determine that the easement value is the before minus the after, right? You know that formula? So therefore, this gives us the easement value, gives us the before. We can simply calculate the after. So the after value is 8,200 minus the 43, and that gives me 3,900 for the after. Why could this be important? Well, in the case of the call that we got from the appraiser, they said, you know, this farm was preserved, you know, just a little bit ago, and it's right next to the property that I'm appraising. So I'm interested in what the values were. I'm like, all right, well, it is public knowledge. You can pull up the deed of easement and you can find those values there. So there's your tip for the day. Now I'm going to give you another example of a deed of easement. Again, we're still in paragraph 23. And if you see, you can read the text here, and it says, the numerator of which is the fair market value of the development easement, right? So that's what I just said. The first number was the easement value. And then it says the denominator of which is the full fair market value of the unrestricted, or the before. But if you look at this fraction here, we have $12,800 over $7,000. Something's not right. How can the numerator, which is supposed to be the easement, how can that be larger than the before number? Well, the answer is it's a clerical error. So if you see something like this, don't just look at this and say, oh, okay, well, then that's what it says. You really have to be careful and you have to think about this. So just taking a look, basically what you want to remember is that the bigger number is your before number. If someone puts it in the wrong spot, ignore that. That brings us to the cost sharing grant agreement. If you happen to see a cost sharing grant agreement, I want you to know that this is a document that can amend the deed of easement. If in that case, and I'm gonna show you this in a second, you know, oh, something's not right. There's a mistake. Is there a cost sharing grant agreement that fixes that? Likewise, if you're going through and you're looking at your reported documents and you see a cost sharing grant agreement, I don't want you to ignore it. I want you to look at that and say, oh, wait, there's a cost sharing grant agreement. Might there be a change that they made to the deed of easement? Because just remember, this document can change the deed of easement. So let's give an example. In the cost sharing grant agreement, you're going to find this somewhere around paragraph 3, 4, 5. And if you can see here, we are in paragraph 3, and it says pursuant to paragraph 23 of the deed of easement. Okay, so there's your one clue. And then here are the values that they had reversed. 7,000 and the 12,008. The numerator is the fair market of the easement, and the denominator is the fair market of the unrestricted or the before. So again, this document can amend it, in which case it did. This is the cost sharing grant agreement that goes with that deed of easement. Those are the real documents that go together. As I said, you're going to find this in paragraphs 3 to 5, and it may modify the amount. You'll most often find the cost sharing grant agreement in Burlington, Mercer, and Gloucester counties. All right. And again, the numerator is your easement value. Okay, here is another example of a cost sharing grant agreement. In this case, you see it's paragraph 5. This is an example with the Pineland. And again, your higher number is the before value. If you see these different numbers in a cost sharing grant agreement, these are the figures that you should be using. Any questions about that? Oh, I did want to mention one more thing. Let me back up. In the Pinelands, you'll see that this document gives some more specific numbers, and it says the numerator of which is the Pinelands formula value of the development easement. So that kind of gives you a clue that this was based on the formula value in this particular case. Okay, questions? Any questions online? Okay, I don't see any questions online. Okay, so we are moving on. The next topic is the appraisal packet that you get with your RFP and handbook. We have some changes and also some reminders. So if you're an approved appraiser, if you came today, you received our new handbook. And there are some changes with it. This handbook is also available online on our website. I'll show you that in a little bit. One of the things that we've done to the packet is that we have this green light report, and we have now made it a requirement that all of the, when you get your appraisal packet, they will all have this document in it. It's something that's very helpful to you as the appraisers. So we've now in-house made it a requirement. We will be giving this to you every time. But we've made a couple changes to the document, again, simply to help you. One of the changes is at the top up here, and the other change is at the bottom. So let's look at those a little bit more carefully. At the top, this information in the past was not necessarily accurate because it had some rounding. So this information at the top gives you your gross acreage, it gives you your exception acreage, and it also gives you your net acreage. But because there was rounding, A, it didn't match the appraisal order checklist, and B, the math didn't work. So we have made changes to this report. So the acreage is no longer rounded, and it should match your appraisal order checklist. The other thing we changed in this report is the percentages down at the bottom. So this is the part where you have your soils information, your wetlands, and so forth. And it used to be that there was just one set of numbers there. And now you'll see that there are two. We have percent of net and we have percent of gross. You as the appraisers should be using the percent of gross column. And for the most part, this isn't going to make a whole lot of difference between the two. Primarily, you're going to see a big difference if there's a large exception area. Now, you might be saying, well, if I'm to use the percent of gross, then why do you even have the percent of net on there? Why don't we just scrap that? Well, the answer is the staff needs that, those numbers. So for you, you can just simply ignore the percent of net unless you are interested in that. But for the purposes of the appraisal, we want you to use the gross figures. Tideland. This does not come up a lot. There is a little bit of information on the tidelands in your handbook. But basically, tidelands are waters that either do or used to flow with the tide. All you need to know about this is that we don't pay on that. So what you're going to see in your appraisal order checklist is that you'll see this gross area. In this case, it's 142.5. and there's a deduction. In this case, it says 2.47. And this tells you that there's a deduction for tidelands. This is all going to be filled out for you. You shouldn't have to worry about it. What you will note though, and you should write about this in your appraisal, you can say that the gross area is 142.5. There was a deduction for tidelands of this, and then therefore you have your adjusted gross area of 140. That's the number that you're going to use in your adjustment grid, the 140. Your map goes along with it. In the past, it had a blue line here, and it was okay, but it was a little difficult to read. It certainly didn't stand out. Now what we've done is we shaded this in blue to make it a little bit easier to read. And this blue, of course, is the tidelands area. You'll also notice that there is a little blurb here, and it tells you what the tidelands area is. In this case, it's 27.72 acres, which is rather substantial if you're the landowner because you're not getting paid on that. You will also notice that that 27 doesn't match this deduction here. That's something that you can look out for. If you get a situation where you have a map that doesn't match the appraisal order checklist, you should always be contacting us if we're your client, or the county or the municipality, whoever is your client, because there might be an issue that needs to be resolved. Border water is very similar to tidelands in the sense that we don't pay for it. Basically, all border water is it's water that's at the property's border. So up here, you will see that there is a body of water here and the property line goes right through it. So we have made a deduction, same as the tidelands, where you have your gross land area. And then there is a deduction here for border water, where you have your adjusted gross acreage, and that is the acreage to be used in the adjustment grid. Okay, any questions about border water, tidelands?
If the lake were in the middle of the property, would you be paying for it?
That's a good question. Yes. If it's in the middle, then we pay for it.
You don't pay with border.
No, and the reason is and I'm going to give you my interpretation of the reason, is this property line is running right through the middle. So it's very difficult to tell where the property line ends or begins. Water takes the shape of its vessel. So that's my interpretation of the reasoning. Or at least that's how I kind of think about what the reason would be versus if it's in the middle of the property. Anything else? Okay. The next topic is improvements and how we are to take photos of them. And we've made a little change about this in the handbook. I don't know if I would call it a change. Maybe it's like a basically, that it is a requirement to have photos of all of the improvements individually. I know it's kind of a little odd because we don't actually value the improvements on a farm for farmland preservation, but you need to take a photo of each of the improvements. So house, barn, etc. And we're going to get into that in a minute. When you're taking your photos, please watch the distance. So something like this photo, if you're going to say that this is, general view of the farm, that would be okay. But if you're going to call it a view of the subject dwelling, that's a little tricky. To me, that's too far away to be able to tell what the dwelling looks like. I can't even really tell what condition that's in so far away. So please try to be close to your improvements and kind of, be purposeful about it. When you have a grouping of improvements, if you want to take a picture of the group and say, subject improvements, that's perfectly fine as long as you also have the individual improvements. Sometimes it's really helpful because then you can kind of see where the improvements are in relation to each other. That's perfectly okay. Just don't miss out on the individual ones. When you're labeling them, we are asking that please use some unique label. We've all gone to a farm and the farmer always has a name. Well, we call that the hay barn. Well, we call that the equipment barn, whatever the names are. You're welcome to use those. If you don't want to use those, or you don't, the farmer doesn't have a name for them or what have you, then make something up. So, barn A, barn B, something like that. And I'll show you in a minute why we find that important. And likewise, if you're going to take multiple photos of the same improvement, please label them like that. So this way we know, is it the front of barn A and the rear of barn A? Or are they two different barns? So in this next slide, you'll see what we're talking about. So here's a little angel on your shoulder, please behave and do these things. In this case, you see this barn is a red rectangular, straight up barn, and it looks very similar to this one. This appraiser has labeled them Hay Barn 1 and Hay Barn 2. That tells me that these are two different barns. But if you look at it, if they weren't labeled, I wouldn't have any way of knowing if this was, say, the front and this was the back of the same barn. So when you're there, it's easier for you to kind of know what you're doing. You know there's one barn or what have you. But for me, reading the report, it's not as easy for me to know. So please label them with a unique label. And again, if it's front and back, please label it as that also. Here's the devil. Don't do this. And these aren't really bad either. Like I said, if it's barn and it's labeled as barn, that might be a little difficult. I suppose if it's the only barn and you only have one photo of it and you called it barn, then it's obvious. When we start to get into multiple properties, then it becomes tricky. And as I said, if you want to take a photo of the grouping of improvements, that's okay, as long as you have the individuals. You took a picture of this structure and of this structure and this one, so on and so forth. All right, pretty simple, not a big deal. Okay, Farmland. This is an interesting topic, and we have added a substantial section to the handbook on farms with PDC. It's about, 20, 25 pages or so in your handbook. It's pretty comprehensive, but it's also step by step. And we've tried to kind of simplify. If you're doing any appraisals in the Farmlands, you know that PDCs are a significant issue. And we go through what we expect, what the requirements are of a farmland appraisal with a farm that's in the Farmlands with PDCs, as well as these are kind of like helpful things for you to think about. There's also some information on our website for Farmlands, and you'll notice, and again, we do work hard to make the website a helpful resource for you. I know a lot of you use the website. If you don't use the website, you can simply Google farmland preservation in New Jersey or something like that, and this is going to come up. You just want to go to the appraisal tab, and this menu here gives you a list of all the things that we offer. So here's the New Jersey Pinelands and Highlands portion. They're basically set up to be kind of similar layout. The Pinelands is what we'll talk about in a minute. But here you can see that there's the Pinelands Commission, and then for the Highlands, there's the Highlands Council. These are just links to their website so that you can get some more information. But they also both have an interactive map. So if you've never used the interactive map, I encourage you to do that. So we've provided links to them. I'll show the interactive maps in a minute. Also, here's another link. If you're doing an appraisal in the Pinelands, it is a requirement that you go to the Pinelands Bank website and get a list of all the different transactions that have taken place. Because it's a requirement, we've decided to make it a little easier for you and give you a link to that website. That's right here. So these are just some helpful things, just a way that we can try to make your life a little easier. This is the Pinelands interactive map. If you've never done an appraisal in the Pinelands, might not really understand, but they have these things called management areas. Management areas in the Pinelands is really just like zoning anywhere else. And if you click on this Pinelands management area layer, it will populate all of these colors for you. And then I put a little legend over at the side. When you're doing an appraisal for us, we'll tell you what zone it's in, but obviously you want to confirm this information. This is a great tool because you're able to zoom in and out. You can see where your property is or your comps. You can see if they're in the Pinelands, if they're not, and then what management area they might be in. There is another layer where you can see the actual zoning for the township. So in this case, I chose Pemberton. And the one reason I used this as an example is because Pemberton is partially in the Pinelands and partially not in the Pinelands. So I thought, oh, okay, this is kind of a good example. Because when you click on this, you get the layer of the Pemberton zoning map. And then you can also clearly see that this portion is where the Pemberton Township is not in the Pinelands. And again, you can zoom in and you can see where the different boundaries are exactly, where the different lot lines are. And it makes it very easy to see if your property is in it, what zoning it has, so forth. Another great tool with this interactive map is that if you click on the zone that you're in, and you might have to right click here, you get this little menu box that pops up and it has this click here for Pemberton Township zoning information. That is a direct link to the municipal zoning ordinance. Kind of a really helpful tip. It's just a little shortcut that I think is a nice little feature. Okay, so very similarly, Highlands has an interactive map, very similar to the Pinelands. As you can see, it has outlined for you here the Highlands area. If you turn on the administrative layer, you'll see that the green and yellow for the preservation and the planning areas. And again, you can zoom in and out. You also have the option of typing in an address. This gives lots and lots. And then it also has a zoning component. So if you come down here and you click on the zoning layer, this does a similar thing to the Pinelands map where it puts the township's zoning on there. Also similarly to the Pinelands map, you can click, in this case, if you click in this little area, it tells me that it's R1 zoning. It tells me that there's a 2-acre minimum lot size. So it gives you some information. Not all townships are going to have this information on there, but if yours has it, might as well use it. This has, in order to find the zoning, there's this code link, and then it has a link here that says more info. When you click on that, that will take you to the zoning for the Highlands map. They just do it a little differently. For Highlands, you know that you need to be aware if the township has opted in. So whatever property you're working on, if the township has opted in, that means they have to comply with stricter septic regulation. You can use this little button here where it says create property report, and that will tell you what the septic density is. Because in the Highlands, maybe you have a zoning requirement of a 5-acre minimum lot size, but if they've opted in, the septic density might be much stricter. So let's say it's 11 acres or something. I don't know. You would have to pull a report. But when you pull the report, it'll tell you, in this case, the property happened to be in the conservation zone. You would then go to your municipal zoning and see what the conservation zone, and it would tell you what the septic density was. But all of this is from the Highlands Interactive Map. Really good feature. Okay, questions about the appraisal packet or the handbook? Online. We have a question. In the Pinelands, does the green light package identify qualified berry production areas such as bogs that may be underwater? That is a very good question. I don't know if I don't really know the answer. Rich, do you know the answer to that question?
The question is like a tillable question, whether a
It's-
bog is treated,
If the bogs are underwater, but it's productive land.
well, bogs are very, very productive and they can be very valuable, and the bogs itself get flooded and it's very productive land. I would think,
The question is it identified in the green light packet?
well, it would be in the tillable land, I would think. Tillable percentage exclude the bog area. That's a very productive area. And there'd be woodlands for the woodlands, which might not be usable at all in the pinelands. So I would think that bog area
It would be part of the tillable.
would be part of the tillable.
I think that's.
That's-
All right.
Border order question.
That's why you get a survey.
That was a very good question. I'll get later about that.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, the next topic is fee simple application. Chuck mentioned this earlier. We have started doing fee simple application where we buy the whole farm, not just the. And because we just started that, there's also a section on that in your handbook, because the appraisals for these are going to be a little different. In a fee simple appraisal, as I said, we're buying the whole farm, not just the easement. So what does that include? It includes your improvements. And we're asking you to do a before value and an after. But why? If we're buying the property in fee as an unrestricted farm, why do we ask you to do an after? Okay, to sell it, but actually there's a lot of time that could be in between. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to use that after value, but that is a very good reason why we would. The reason is we've done, in the past year, we've done probably half a dozen fee simple applications. And I would say probably half of those, the landowner has changed their mind midstream. And they said, you know what, I changed my mind. I do want to keep my farm and I just want to preserve it. And now we've ordered the appraisal to have just before value and not the after. So we've just decided that as a matter of course, let's do a before and an after in case any changes happen in the application process. So unless you're told otherwise, that's what we're looking for. And this is mentioned in the handbook instruction. You're going to have to consider the improvements in your highest and best use if your property has one, because we need to value them. And that's going to go for your before as well as your after. You are required to value the improvements. We're buying the whole thing. So we need to know what all of it is worth. So you will use a cost approach to determine that. That means you're going to have to measure them. You're going to have to take pictures of them, give full description, estimate the depreciation, you know, the whole 9 yards. And make sure that you do an interior inspection and include photos. So here are some examples of what we are expecting, and you've all done appraisals with improvements. So it's not like this is anything different from what you've done for those types of appraisals. It's just different for us. So here's two examples. In the first example, the appraiser has given some very brief but important characteristics. They give the size, they give the ceiling height, the floor, electric service, and so forth. In the second example, the appraiser gives much more detail. In both cases, there's photos that are included. It's up to you, but here's the thing. We get two appraisals. I have yet to see where the improvement value from both appraisals is the same. So if you give me enough information that I can figure out how you got to those values, that's going to be very helpful. But if you give me just some very broad information and you keep the rest like in your appraisal file, and that's how you got to the number, and now I have a big difference between the two values, it might be difficult for us to figure out what, you know, who's right, who's wrong, and then we might have to ask questions. So it might be easier for you from the jump to include as much information in your appraisal as possible so that we can kind of follow the breadcrumbs to where you got your numbers. Since you need to include interior photos, here are some examples. In the right-hand side, the appraiser chose to do one photo on a page of just the interior. That was very helpful. The example on the left happens to be the appraiser chose to do 6 photos on the page, and these were deferred maintenance examples where they said, all right, here's some interior photos that have some issues, and here's some exterior. That's perfectly acceptable also. Because remember, you're going to have to identify some deferred maintenance for your depreciation and so forth. So all of these things are going to be very helpful for us. Again, nothing new if you're already valuing improvements. Here is an example of how you might do your improvement value summary. So, you know, you go to these farms, a lot of them have multiple improvements. They got the hay barn, they got the house, they got the, you know, I don't know, the silo, the stable, a garage, whatever. In this example, the appraiser chose to kind of list them out like this. You know, main residence, farmhouse, hay barn, detached garage, and then they gave the description here, the replacement cost, the depreciation, and so forth going down the side, and then they have a grand total here. That's one way to do it. In this example, they gave a list in this way, and then they just used the numbers here. They have the detail on another page. That's also perfectly acceptable. And then the total is listed here. That total is important because when you are doing your value conclusion, and this is something that's probably different from other appraisals, we are asking that you separate the values. So your improvement value is going to be here, and it's not going to get added into anything else. And the reason is when we make our offers to the landowners, we give them an offer as a per acre value, and then we get the property survey, and then we offer them the depreciated or the improvement value as a separate thing. So in other words, let's say the value is 10,000 per acre, and you know, they have 100 acres for $1 million. Then we go and get a survey, and it turns out, oh no, they actually have only 90 acres. So they would get $900,000. Those two numbers are going to change depending on the survey, but the improvement value is not. So it's going to be, in that case, it would be, oh, okay, the 900,000 for the land plus the $500, about 500,000. So please keep those separate. In a different example, where we talked about the highest and best use of the improvements, you might have a situation where you have substantial improvements, but in the before, a developer would demo those to make way for whatever it is that they're doing. They could be substantial to where you have, you know, a significant improvement, demolition cost. So you could handle it this way, where you make a deduction for your demolition cost, but again, you're just leaving it separate. You identify it as such, but leave it there for us. And then in the after, those significant improvements have value. They have contributory value to the landowner. So that's where you would value your improvements and then just list them off on the side. Okay, any questions about fee simple application? Patty?
You're asked to do a cost approach. Would you accept comparable sales for a house, on a property? No, because
You
doing
mean
a cost approach, all the depreciation and everything.
Like as if you were doing like a residential appraisal?
Right.
What about the underlying land? How does that get factored in?
Like,
Oh, I was-
just give it an 8, compare it to other house on an acre or on 2 acres, whatever you think supporting land is for the house.
Your weakness right there in the example, your depreciation was 80% on some buildings, 44, 77.
Yeah.
It's a very subjective number.
Of course, depreciation.
Sales are tough because it's theoretical. You gotta put the house on a lot.
Yeah, depreciation is always going to be the subjective, the weakness of the cost approach. I would say that there's probably nothing wrong with that, as long as, everything was explained. I don't, I would say that would be acceptable. Yep. Okay, we have a question. Any other questions in the room before I go to the online question? Okay, we have an online question, and that is, for the after value in a fee simple acquisition, are the improvements excluded? Okay, so that's another reason why we want the improvement value to be stated separately. You're doing a land value as if you would if it was just a regular farmland preservation appraisal, and then the improvement value is separate. Just keep that as a separate number, and then we'll take care of it. Anything else? Okay, moving on. The next topic is Farmland Preservation Program, past, present, and future. So let's talk a little bit about appraisal workload and direct SADC assignment. I want you to understand that we at the SADC are given 120 days to make an offer to the landowner. That is our deadline. That 120 days is comprised of a few things. Let's call it 30 days from the time the landowner signs the option agreement to getting approval from Treasury, getting bids for appraisal, awarding the assignments. That's 30 days for that piece. 35 days for the appraisals. And then 30 to 45 days for us to review them, for the SADC to give their approval and certify the value. That's if all goes well. And we all know that things don't always go well. And there could be a hiccup in any one or all three of these steps in the process. So we're just trying to kind of let you know what goes on behind the scenes. Rich had said, oh, when we used to do appraisals, and okay, this is the appraisal and that's the story. There's so much behind the scenes that it's difficult to appreciate or understand all that goes into it. So we're just trying to kind of educate you and let you know that this is what's involved. The formula is coming, and we anticipate that there will be an increase in applications. We've already seen it, because anybody that applies now does have the option of holding out for the formula. They can get their application in, and they know their appraised value, and then if the formula doesn't come until next year, They have the option of taking that value if it's higher. So we anticipate more work coming. So as a result of that, you all received an email about due dates and award eligibility. Because there's going to be this increase in workflow and we do have this rather tight deadline for ourselves, we've decided to make some changes. So you'll notice that the appraisals are now due 35 days. It used to be 30. It's now due 35 days from the notice to proceed. And that date will be listed in the notice to proceed. Before it just said 30 days and you kind of had to guess what the date was. The date will be specified. That is a hard deadline. So what happens is if you have any jobs that are pending, that are past due, even if it's by 1 day, you are now ineligible to be awarded a new assignment. So what does that mean? That means that even if your bid was the lowest, you will not be eligible if you have a job that's even 1 day late. It's not a death sentence. This is only until such time that you have no late appraisal. So your ineligibility can change at any time. What's good about this is that we think this is going to promote a healthier bidding environment. You can keep submitting your bids, whether you're ineligible or not, you can keep submitting them. We're going to kind of monitor that. But I think also what's happened in the past is that maybe some people were not bidding because, you know, perhaps they couldn't compete with the lower bids. Now what's going to happen is there might be a little bit of a shift where if the lowest bidder is no longer ineligible, the next higher bid will get the award. So we encourage everyone to bid. We do have to stay on track of our timeline, and this also prevents any appraiser from becoming inundated with work and where they can't keep up. You know, we kind of all get to this situation where we have so much work that it's very hard to stay on top of things, especially when, and we're trying to fix this also, when we release more than one job for an RFP at a time. And we recognize that that's an issue. If you are bidding on, say, 5 jobs, you know, you want to bid on all 5. If you win the award on all 5 of those, they're all going to have the same due date. So kind of also think about that, maybe self-police this a little bit. And, you know, I don't know what else to tell you other than just try to, you know, we're all just trying to do the best we can to manage the workload. And as I said, we anticipate it getting bigger. Oh, sorry, Patty, go ahead.
Is this just for work directly from you?
Yes, this is for,
I believe the county ones I just got were 60 days.
yeah, no, the county partners are different. This is just for direct assignments. So SADC direct easements and fee simple projects. Any other questions? I have an online question. Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Is there a way that we can, like, we put in a bid, you know, we do work for multiple other clients as well.
Sure.
Sometimes you don't know the time frame of when that's going to come in. Other assignments come in. We have the option to decline an award if we receive an award and can't meet the deadline again. Like, what does that process look like?
I believe you do have the ability to decline it. The question is the timing. So the bidding process is usually like 5 days. You know, some might be shorter, some might be longer, but I think in general it's 5 days. So are you talking about like withdrawing a bid within that 5 days? Are you talking about, you know, after?
Maybe my question is, so that there is a 5-day period from when the bid's closed to the notice of award?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you're saying.
Sometimes that hasn't been, I think that sometimes they've been longer and.
Oh, you mean from the time the bids closed to the notice of award? That I don't know. And I could check that with our fiscal department to find out. I think that varies, depending on a number of factors. But I would say that if you have not yet been awarded, is that kind of the question? You haven't yet been awarded it, but you know that you're the lowest.
No, I think after the bidding closes, you submit, and I think sometimes, for whatever reason, a long period of time does pass before it's awarded.
Okay.
And other jobs or assignments have come in, there's other priorities.
Yes.
Just in the new scenario, want to withdraw the bid or don't want to accept the award. Is that an option?
Yes. You could still, either email Rich or me. You could also email our fiscal guys, Sam McCaffrey or Matt DiStallo. You could email them and just say, you bid on this and you want to withdraw your bid. That's fine.
And let us know as soon as possible, I guess, before the award. We would appreciate that, and we'll see if we can, you can skip an assignment that you were a little bidder on if you tell us early enough. Once it's awarded,
And it gets tricky.
then it's kind of on you to get it done.
But when you get an award though, you have to click accept.
Yeah.
You're supposed to click accept, so you could at that time.
Yeah, it kind of has to go before the award. Once it's
It gets awarded, but then they don't actually authorize you to proceed for a few days after that.
Right, and I think that's the gray area. I think if you were to click accept and then something happened the next day, you had not received your notice to proceed yet. I think as long as you haven't received that notice to proceed, I think there's probably, like a day or 2 or 3 grace period where you would be able to email one of us and say, hey, listen, I accepted, but I actually can't take the job.
I would personally appreciate that. Give us a heads up. We'll try to handle that situation. So when in doubt, reach out.
Okay, there's an online question. Eminent domain laws require a 10-day notice via certified mail for the property inspection. Is this considered in the 30-day turn time?
Yes.
I think you mean for the appraisal, and so it's 35 days now, and yes. Sorry, but the due date is the due date, unfortunately. You could certainly start doing your research, researching comps and using aerial mapping, whatever resources you have before you do your inspection. I would recommend that. Get a head start on your legwork. There's a lot that can be done before you do the inspection. So yes, that is. Okay, any other questions? Patty?
Are some of these under eminent domain possibilities? I mean, I didn't think that would be
No,
necessary.
but that's a very good question. I don't know why, I don't know if that's just like a general question. It's a very good question, because we had an eminent domain project recently, but for the most part, most farmland preservation is not going to have eminent domain.
Yeah, most of your assignments won't be eminent domain. If you get that assignment, I lost my thought. We do have a section. If you get asked to appraise a property that's already preserved, that's an eminent domain situation. You have to appraise it as though it's not preserved, because we're entitled. That's a trick. I submitted a report. It was a restricted farm, so I sent them an after value. Paul Burns goes, now you got to do work, because we're entitled to a percentage based on that ratio she showed you in the deed. So there, but if you ever get someone, if you ever do one of these, look at our eminent domain section, reach out to us. But for the most part, you're not involved.
I think the point is, the due date is 35 days. There have been times when we have had to adjust the due date. That'll be in the notice to proceed. We'll tell you that. And also, I believe there was one time where we had a very tight turnaround, and we put that in the RFP also, because we're kind of like, you know, trying to highlight the fact that needed this to come in, this can't be late. So we try to give you guys information like that in the RFP itself, but sometimes it's difficult to read them. All right, anything else? Yes?
Yeah, one question in here about income capitalization, using that. Seems a very rare instance that we would be involved in.
Very, very rare.
Because obtaining that income information and getting it to be honestly, I don't know where you can go with it then.
Very, very, very rare. I think it even says that in the handbook.
Yes.
So yeah, for the most part, you're not going to be doing that.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, Rich, you ready?
Ready for that slide. So I've noticed you're all on diets because nobody's eating the carbs. So maybe donuts in that next year. Make sure you take some of these bagels home.
Donuts are sure a lot better than bagels.
Well,
They're fun.
take,
He listed donuts.
take some of these home so I don't eat them. So I told Jolene to give me a scary slide. And the question is, fear the formula or not? Clowns are frightening. Let's be honest. Our kids hated clowns. I think they're right. They're great in horror movies. So she brought the clown up. This particular clown's dentist has a hell of a sense of humor. But let's talk about the formula. You guys have spent your life estimating market value. You take great pride in your work. I personally have done the same thing. I'm an appraiser. You guys hopefully will be involved in every application doing the same thing you're doing now. Hopefully that's how it's going to go. And there'll be a formula that you're not involved in. But you should know that this is a change in our program. Some owners may ask you, what about the formula? How are you going to calculate that? Well, I'm just here doing a typical appraisal. The formula is done separately. All the applicants are going to be offered the formula if they want to wait for it. They can accept your appraised value, or they can wait for the formula and pick one. We have a formula value in the Pinelands that our appraisers don't even really know about, and that's fine. They go out and they do the PDC farms. And give you an example, when PDC credits were not valuable, the formula value was higher. And recently the PDC values have gone up in the Pinelands and the appraised value is higher. So there's a choice, but important thing for you guys, there's a need for appraisal. So this is happening. I don't know how it's going to play out, so I can't tell you anything definitely. If I was king, my wife says all the time, I'm not king. I'd have you guys involved in doing typical appraisals, and that would be part of the process as a comparison. But I don't know exactly. I think that's in the works. Chuck explained that very well. So hopefully, the short term is that Jolene mentioned it. There's going to be a lot more applications, and good. Everybody, all our partners are telling farmers, get your applications in now. You'll be offered the formula. So we're going to get an increase in application. And hopefully that will result in more assignments, more work, more money. Again, bid your assignments. Bid assignment. You know, when I was an outside appraiser, I rarely got an SADC job. I just got outbid. There may be opportunities for higher bids getting assignments. We're going to have to do something. If low bidders get 10 assignments, we're going to have to make moves. And we do have some things in place where they would have to wait to get new jobs. So, you know, when you hear formula, at least you feel like a toll taker when Easy Pass came in. You know, you're going to get replaced. So hopefully it results, hopefully they keep the tie and you continue to do great appraisal work. Some states have used the appraisal before value. The formula value can't be more than 80% of the before value. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know anything, but there are reasons for, you guys are our connection to market value. And you're not calculating the formula. So I'm hoping you get more work. That's what I'm hoping.
We have some website changes. You know that due to Daniel's law, we had to take down the list of sales for both unrestricted and restricted farms. We also had to take down our list of preserved farms. If you are an approved appraiser, you should have received this information from me via an email maybe 2 weeks ago. And we continue to issue the list of sales for both before and after every 6 months-ish, you know, spring and fall. And then the preserve farms, that goes every spring. The change, the website, is that you will now see that there are lists on the website. These are basically lists that are available to the public. They do not have any Daniel's Law sensitive information on them, but they are available here. If you are an approved appraiser and you receive the list, I recommend that you save the list somewhere on your computer because, as I just said, these are not exactly the same. These are kind of protected. We forgot to say, but it was mentioned in the chat for those of you who are online, we forgot to say that this presentation today is being recorded and we will be putting it on the website. You've attended these before, so you know that we do put the different conferences on the website. So if you were listening to something today and you forgot what Peter said or what Chuck said and you want to go back and listen to it, eventually the recording will get posted to the website. We also have the handbook. So this handbook that we were talking about, that is available on the website for anybody here. And we also have these helpful tools. So many of you attended the webinar that we gave this past winter. And the webinar was also recorded. There is a full video of it here. But in addition to that, you might not want to watch the full webinar. You might only be interested in a particular segment. Let's say it was for a web soil survey or whatever. You could look at this list and we have links that'll take you directly to that portion of the webinar, as well as when it says PDF, that those are written instructions. So keep looking at our website. There's helpful stuff on here that we're adding all the time to make it better, easier for you. Okay, so this is kind of a cool little map. This is like an animated thing. And if you're watching the dark red, you'll see that this is going through the time from 1986 up until 2015. And you'll see as it goes that there's more and more red that's getting put into the map. And red means urban growth. So Chuck was talking earlier about the rate that we are losing available land to development. And his map went from, I believe, 2015 to 2020. You'll notice that this map stops where his begins. So clearly, farmland preservation is very important to keep the state from being overwhelmed by urban growth or, you know, something that's less desirable for our landscape. So what farms have been preserved so far? Chuck talked about that earlier, that there's been about 250,000 acres that we have preserved. This map is from Conservation Blueprint, and all of these tannish specs are the preserved farms. So this map here is just like a zoomed in version of this area here of Camden, Gloucester, Cumberland counties here. And you can see when you zoom in, that's quite a bit. And you're looking at this and you might say, well, okay, then mission accomplished. And as Chuck said, we have about 250,000 more acres to do. And that's what this map is. So this is, again, from Conservation Blueprint. They show you what farms are targeted for preservation. Blue, green, and yellow are the codes for kind of like the priority of what should be preserved. So you can see all the different speckles throughout the state. And again, this is the same zoomed in portion from the other slide where it's this Gloucester, Salem, Cumberland County area. There is still quite a bit left. That was just an example. I mean, obviously in the Northwest, there's plenty to preserve also. So there's still plenty of work to be done, plenty of appraisals to be done. There's a lot left of New Jersey to be preserved as far as we're concerned. Questions about the past, present, and future of farmland preservation?
You're acquiring fee simple properties. How long do you think you'll take to sell them?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I think it depends. We could hold them for maybe a year. I don't know how long we actively try to sell them. I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to do in-house, like we preserve it, so forth, figuring out, you know, what kind of dwelling opportunity we're going to put on there and stuff like that. So I don't think there's a clear answer to that question, but I've heard people say stuff like, you know, maybe a year or so later, we might try to sell them. I don't really have a clear answer there.
They like to be auctioned.
Yeah, I think they auction them, yes. Okay.
When you make an offer to preserve a farm, is there like an expiration date to that?
Yes.
How long is that?
I think it's 60 days.
Oh.
Don't hold me to that. But they are given a written offer. It is non-negotiable. And, but now in this time frame, I believe if they accept, I believe the process is as long as they accept within that time frame, they are eligible to get the formula value later. I think that's how. You guys know? Yes, that is how it moves. Yes, that is how.
They have to accept to get the extension. Is that, sorry if you don't know.
They have to. They can defer.
Yeah, they can
They can
defer. So
defer.
they can accept the offer and wait for the formula, and then the base offer that they get is locked into whatever it is.
Okay.
They can also defer that offer and say, I am not accepting your offer, but I want to wait until the formula comes out. So then they just go on.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah, and it depends, right? Like other due diligence can proceed or not based on.
So they pretty much have the right to wait for the offer if they want. It'd be smart to do so.
Okay. So Katie says 30 days, but so 30 days from the offer, 30 days to accept the offer. She says our interim policy, the formula policy, does not hold landowners to the deadline. So is 30 days to accept? Is that what she's saying? Yes.
But
Okay.
that's
So it's
waiting.
30 days.
That's
Not-
waiting now.
Right. No, wait, I understand that, but it's
Right.
30 days for them to accept that, to answer Patty's question. Okay. Anything else? All right. I think you're next.
We all need to understand what we're doing here. There is a reason for farmland preservation. I asked Jolynn to give me this slide like a couple days ago, and she whips it right up. It's beautiful. But what's more important, a gold bar or a piece of corn? Food security is extremely important. And if you were starving, I would argue corn's a metaphor for food grown on a farm. I would argue that if your family was starving, food is more important. Clean air, maybe fresh, clean water, shelter, and food. These are extremely important things. And food security, we take it for granted. We walk into Wegmans or ShopRite and we could just pick whatever food we want. Well, this stuff comes from farms. And if we don't preserve it, we won't have food security. The United States has an unbelievable agricultural industry. It's phenomenal. There are places in the world that don't have food security. So remember how important this legacy is. There's a lot of other reasons for farmland preservation, preventing sprawl, but food security is a basic need, and you guys are all part of that. So I hope you feel that. So thank you very much. Thank you for your great work. I can't thank you enough for what you do for us. We're partners with you in getting good appraisal work done. And we're very proud to certify values within the range of the two appraisals in 99% of the cases. So thank you. Do you have any closing shots?
No, I just want to thank everyone for coming in person and also online. Let us know your comments, throughout the time. If you really liked being here online, if you liked being here in person, if you have topics that you want us to discuss, let us know that stuff, because we're here for you. And we try to make the seminar something that is valuable to you. We put a lot of thought into it. But if there's a topic that you think that we should be discussing that we're not, then please let us know. And thank you.
And thank you to our guest speakers.